Hello everyone, I'm Troy Dodds and welcome to the On The Record podcast presented by The Western Weekender. On this podcast I'm joined by special guests who all have such great stories to tell about Penrith and the role they've played in our city. They are Penrith stories told by Penrith people. Today my special guest is Jim Mason. Jim has an incredible history in Penrith, from being born on High Street to working at Penrith City Council for more than 4 decades. Very few people know more about Penrith than Jim, and I really hope you enjoy our chat. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Troy.
Now, first question we always ask, where were you born, where did you grow up?
Yes, like you said, I was born in High Street, Penrith, at the private hospital, which is opposite the fire station. It naturally doesn't exist today. And that was in the 27th of August 1942, so I've just turned 80.
Happy birthday, yes.
And I grew up at a little rural district called Orchard Hills. Now, Orchard Hills, when I grew up and was growing up, is a lot different as it was today, as it is today.
Mm.
Orchard Hills then was an area of primarily growing table grapes and orchards and some fruit and vegetables. But today, naturally, it's been subdivided and a lot different to when I grew up. But that's where I grew up, and I was at Orchard Hills for the first 30 years of my life.
On Frogmore Road, is that right?
On the corner of Frogmore Road and Kingswood Road.
And what were your parents doing? What were they? What brought them to Orchard Hills?
Well, my grandfather in 1919 purchased 20 acres at Orchard Hills. He purchased a farming property off the teacher in charge of Orchard Hills Public School, Mr. Frederick Watson. It was 20 acres on the corner of Kingswood Road and Wentworth Road, Orchard Hills, and it was a farm there of grapes, as table grapes, and that's where the family came in 1919, and my father and 2 of his siblings went to school at Orchard Hills and attended Orchard Hills Public School, and so did 7 of us. He had 7 children, and we all went to Orchard Hills Public School. We kept the school afloat because the numbers in those days got down to as little as 10, I think. So, but in 1936, my grandfather gave my father 10 acres on the corner of Frogmore Road and Kingswood Road, and that's where he built his house. He built a house there in 1936, which I don't think will ever fall down because it's made of reinforced concrete.
Yep.
Right.
So it still stands today?
Still there today. They've made a few alterations. But when the freeway went through in the 70s, the M4, they cut our property in half. We had the 10 acres and they cut it in half. So naturally that made a lot of difference, not only to us but to the whole district. But on the 10 acres, we always ran a few cows. We grew vegetables and fruit trees and chooks, etc. So we had a bit of not a farm, but we had a rotary hoe there, and looked after ourselves pretty well with the eggs and the milk and butter, etc. So that's where we grew up. But it was quite an ideal growing up period because it was close and handy to Penrith, although you didn't go to Penrith that often because you still had to you didn't have the bus service like we do today and things like that.
So you essentially grow up in 1950s Penrith. What was Penrith like then, 70 odd years ago?
Yes, well, Penrith, you'd really say, only consisted of High Street, really, and Station Street. That were the main areas of Penrith, down to the river, down to the weir. The weir, you didn't swim at the weir because it was notorious of having broken glass there, so you didn't dare swim around the weir in those days, unless you were a good swimmer and didn't have to touch the bottom, of course. But that was Penrith was basically still a rural area. You had those great large areas of rural area at at Castlereagh, and also the big orange orchards at Emu Plains. And you still had farming along Nepean Avenue, the market gardeners there, and you had you had out at Regentville as well. And where Woodruff Gardens were in the 50s, there was still the Chinese market gardens there, where the tennis courts are today. Yes.
And what about you in high school? We'll talk about where your career goes in just a moment, but was there something in particular that you wanted to follow, or were you a bit of a good student? What kind of student were you?
I would say I didn't like study, so I'd say I was an average student. I always thought I was going to be a school teacher. I went to Penrith High School, like the rest of my brothers and sisters, and I studied. I was the middle one of the family.
Okay.
So I.
How many brothers and sisters?
I had 2 brothers and 4 sisters.
Wow. Okay.
So there were 7 of us all together. Yeah. So we all went, like I say, we all went to Penrith High School. Caught the bus into the high school. And I was there from 55 to 59. I completed my leaving certificate in 59, and I got 5 Bs, right? And I got a Teachers College scholarship to Armidale Teachers College, right? But in the meantime, I'd applied for several jobs. I'd applied for a job at the Commonwealth Bank and the council. I got a job at the bank. I got a job at the council. And I weighed things up. And I decided to accept the job on the council.
And so begins a very, very long stint at council. I think 45 years.
45, just over 45 years.
So you never make it to Armidale.
No.
What do you do? What do you first do in council? This is 1960, am I right? I think you started in January 1960.
I started on the 4th of January 1960. Yes.
All right. And what's the first job at Penrith City Council? And where was council located at that point?
Council was located on the corner of Henry Street and Evans Street.
Yep.
Where they built the library.
Okay.
That was the old council chambers. It was the real old council chambers there that was built in the 1880s, I suppose. That's where the offices were. They were attached to it. I think some of them might have even consisted of old army huts.
Yep.
But there's very few of us still alive that worked in that building, right? So my first job, I worked in the rates department, right, under a fellow called Bob Wilkinson, and my job was to collect the mail every morning, collect the mail from the post office, and take it to the office. I also was involved in collecting the rates, actually receiving the money when people came in to pay it. And at that time, they also had a branch office still at St Mary's, because you'd be familiar that in 48 they amalgamated with St Mary's.
Yep.
And St Mary's and Penrith, and I think it was Nepean Shire, and I think it was Castlereagh Council amalgamated, and they became they were Penrith Municipal Council originally, but then they became Penrith City Council. And St Mary's had a branch office where we collected the rates. I think it was once a fortnight at St Mary's. So my job was to go down there and spend the day at St Mary's and collect the rates at St Mary's.
Very different to how we're paying our rates today and whatnot, having to pop in on a certain day.
Well, it was an ancient cash register we used, which you wouldn't never have seen, the type. But it's a lot different than it is today, naturally. But that was my first job, working in the rates department.
And it's only a year into your time at Penrith Council that there's a bit of there's quite a tragedy in Penrith, in that the mayor at the time passed away in 1961. So that was obviously the biggest story around town, but certainly working at council would have been a big hit as well.
It was, because not in those days that I had very much to do with the councillors or the aldermen of the council, but I did know some of them, of course. Through the junior farmers and things like that I was involved in. especially Albie Flint and people like that, and Leo Blattman from Mulgoa, and those type of people, and of course, you knew Bill Chapman, of course, and Sam Dwyer. Those names were very prominent in the district. And when Leo Spiess died suddenly, well, the staff were given, after we attended the funeral at the Catholic Church in High Street, Penrith, we formed a guard of honour out the front, all the staff, and then we were given the rest of the day off. So it was certainly a big occasion, a very sad occasion, and a very changing incident for the whole of the council, because they lost a mayor who'd been in office for a few years as mayor, and then they had a mayoral election, and that was when Bill Chapman was elected as mayor and remained in that position for some years, as well as being the local MLA.
And where does your career go from here? Because I know that you eventually become council's first personnel officer. Is that the modern day HR?
That's right.
Situation? So you're in charge of personnel there, first time. What was that like?
No, all right. But before I got to there, I was then transferred to the financial section under the care and control of Max Baker.
Okay.
You would have heard of Max Baker.
Yes, indeed.
Max Baker was a long-term employee of the council, growing up in the district. Played football for Penrith, of course, in his younger day, and he was then my supervisor, and I worked in the finance section. I did payroll, among other things. And in that position, I acted as assistant to him and looked after, and I was payroll supervisor as well. And then council decided they needed someone to look after the personnel, so I then appointed the first personnel officer of the council, and my role then was to get involved in all the employment of any of the council staff that were employed, except the top echelon, naturally. I didn't get involved with them.
And I'm guessing at this time, council staff is growing just like Penrith is growing as well.
Yes.
I mean, council goes on to become probably the biggest employer in town, but then I'm guessing it was a modest staff that's growing.
Yes, growing all the time. And at that stage, in the late 1970s, council became involved in childcare. The Whitlam government, I believe the funds came from the Whitlam government, and they at the time erected the largest childcare centre in the district, and for many years the largest childcare centre in the whole of the area.
And of course, council, just fast forwarding today, still has probably
more childcare centres than
anyone, absolutely.
And that was the first of them. It was called Urami, situated at Warrington.
Still around, I think.
Yeah, still there, Urami. It had a big kitchen, and it was about 3 or 4 rooms. And I remember when Max Baker had to negotiate with the union and try and work out hours and award for them, because there was no such thing under the award. Yes. So as part of being personal officer, I got involved in, like I say, every person that was employed on the council. And I'd say 90% of those positions I sat on the interviews.
Yep.
Whether it was for a labourer, a health inspector, an engineer, a childcare worker, or anyone like that, I sat on the interviews and got involved. And that's why I got to know all the staff of the council, because I was there when they were interviewed, and when they started, I was also involved in giving them a induction type of thing.
So you end up having a pretty big role with all the staff at council.
That's right.
Just to reverse back a bit to the early 70s, 1971, of course, Penrith celebrates its centenary of local government, and I know you were pretty involved in that, but that was a pretty big event in Penrith at that time.
A very big event, yes, it was a very big event. Don Hawkins was Harold Corr appointed Don Hawkins to oversee all that, and a fellow called Arthur Court, who was, I think, at that stage the chief clerk. He was more or less the secretary of it, and I got involved in looking after the section down at the river, and where they put on various activities on the river. So I was involved there, but they had a very enormous pageant and march. The governor was there to unveil a stone that's what we can
like
say,
a
plaque, and
yep.
on the big sandstone.
Yep.
In front of the council chambers on the corner of Henry Street and Station Streets, and they had a big ceremony out at the showground, and they had a procession both through Penrith and St Mary's, which ended up at the showground, and so they had floats and everything. All the girls dressed up in period, a period costume. We all grew sideburners and moustaches.
Yeah, I've seen some of the photos. Because one thing that we know that Penrith Council and Penrith Library has done so well is the archive of photos that they have available, both online and at the library itself. And there's a lot of photos from that centenary.
We had waistcoats and everything.
Yeah, big function at the old Panthers Leagues Club, of course, on Station Street.
I went to the ball there.
Yep.
And I think I gave the library my ball, the ball tickets I still have kept.
Yep.
Yes, it was an enormous night and a very big thing for the city to celebrate that centenary. Yes.
Now, what's happening? This is the 1970s. What's happening in your personal life at this stage? Because I think you meet your wife at council. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, yeah. She worked as a bookkeeping machine operator.
So did you interview her?
No. I wasn't personnel officer.
Okay.
This was before I became long before I became personnel officer.
Yep.
No. And I became engaged in 1972.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Union Picnic Day, 1972.
Yep.
Right. That was in March. I think is it March? Yeah, March 1972, and then 12 months later, we got married. But in the meantime, I'd purchased a block of ground off my sister and her husband at Lapston.
Mm-hmm.
In you know Lapston.
Absolutely,
in Governor's Drive, which was one of the, Lapston was regarded as a bit of a posh suburb, I suppose, because it was built by Alf Hand, and it was built to standards that no one had seen before, with the curved guttering and the utilities underground. So it was a bit of a unique, but it was quite costly to live there because the rates were so high.
Yep.
And my sister said that her husband was in the Air Force and they were moving all around the district, so all around Australia, I should say, and overseas. So they didn't wish to keep the land, so she offered it to me and I purchased it, and I built a house there, and that's where we lived for the next 48 years.
And of course, still making the trip down to Penrith to work every day.
Yeah, it wasn't far.
Not far at all.
I was always an early starter.
Yeah.
So I could only took me 10 minutes to get to work.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's Penrith? You mentioned before, I should say too, that the chambers being on the corner of Henry and Station. Yeah. So of course, that's the first big move.
Yes.
We know where council ends up, but that would have been a big move to move there as well. You would have been part of that.
Yes, I was there because I only served about 6 months up in the other old council chambers, 6 months, a little more than 6 months, and we moved into the new council chambers, right? But I think the new council chambers was too small before they started because they were going to have the library in one part and then etc. And it didn't quite work out that way. And
it, of course, still stands today, although the subject of a development application at the moment, so we might see that disappear.
Yes.
But a building that still served Penrith well with different community organisations and whatnot.
Yeah, and they had the council chambers up there, and it was a focal point of the district. Although it didn't have a you couldn't have a major function there. You could still have they had committee rooms there. You could have other functions as well.
And what is Penrith like at this point? So let's talk late 70s, early 80s.
It's
big growth period.
Very
in
big
time.
growth period because the residential areas were extending both south. South Penrith was becoming online, and also it was going out towards Cranebrook and also the St Clair area. Erskine Park was being developed.
Yep.
So Penrith was growing all the time, enormously. And
the suburban spread very much on at that point.
And of course, you must remember at this stage, a little earlier than that Penrith, Emir Plains became under the control of Penrith Council. So there was changes and urban development, more development at Emir Plains as well. So it was really spread out all over. Yes.
And of course, probably the biggest change to the CBD happens in the 70s as well, with the development of Penrith Plaza.
Yes.
So tell us about that and how much, because you mentioned about High Street earlier, and High Street was, the focal point of the town. Even today, we know that High Street really struggled to deal with that shopping centre being built across from the old council chambers. That must have, I guess, provided a bit of a cultural shift in terms of how people shopped and how they reacted around the city.
And at this time too, remember they built the mall in Penrith.
Yes.
Yes.
The ill-fated mall.
That's right. Well, it was a very big enterprise by the council. To build a mall, to block off High Street. I remember Bill Cammick once telling me, the late Bill Cammick, Dr. Cammick told me once when he left his practice in High Street, Penrith, I think he said he had to make one left turn to get to his house.
Yeah.
After the mall was built, I think he said he made about half a dozen or more turns. That's how much the mall affected some of the traffic in the town.
And many would say never really recovered, even though we're decades on now from the mall being ripped up. But
with the building of the plaza, you saw the establishment of the major stores down at the plaza, and of course you saw the decline of like Fletcher's moved down to the plaza. Big stores like Fletcher's and Neil's were up.
Neil's, and all the supermarkets
were
on High Street as well.
Right. So they've lost all those, and so therefore the High Street unfortunately did decline and die a little bit. And with the plaza certainly made a difference to Penrith. It drew more people into Penrith. But however, it did certainly affected the businesses in High Street.
Now, council, of course, in the 90s moves to its current home, the Civic Centre. Now, this would have been... tell me about the process of when, I guess, as a long-term staff member, you first heard about that move and the process that happened, because it was a mammoth project. Talking about those photos, there's great photos online of seeing it get built and then eventually open. But it's probably Penrith's biggest... certainly government project that at a council level that's been built.
It was required because council was working out of 3 or 4 different offices. While they worked out of the council chambers, over the years they acquired Colbuccan Store.
Yep.
And moved the council offices up there, right? But they also had offices in Borwick House.
Yep.
And they had offices on the corner of the lane, Gaymark Lane.
Yes, yep.
They had offices upstairs there. So I worked, when I first became personal officer, I worked out of Colbuccan Store. But before that, we had been the finance, the pay office, Max Bacon, his office, and the health and building section were occupying offices in Borwick House. So the council was split all over the place. But then they came that when they sorted out Cole Buchan's building, they brought them all together, except some were still in Gaymark Lane. So the council's offices were spread over several buildings, and the building of the new complex, the new civic centre, brought everyone together under the one roof. It was difficult to try and visualise what it was going to be like. You can see a plan, yourself. If you were building a new house, you say, well, that's the plan for it, but you don't really know what it's going to be like until it's actually up, and how it's going to function, how everyone's going to fit in and work together. So it was a very big upheaval for everyone to move from the offices down to a new civic centre where we had more open offices as well. Some of us were used to having our own little office.
Yep, the world of open plan arrived.
Yeah, and to an open plan where you're all together makes a lot of difference. And at this time, you must realise too that computers were playing a greater role in everyone's lives. Everyone had at their desk.
Well, it's hard to imagine your first desk at Penrith City Council. Certainly no computer anywhere around.
No.
Probably not even a calculator on there. You're doing it all yourself.
Well, we had a manual calculator. Yep. You didn't have an electric calculator. Pulled the handle with it. But I wasn't. I must say that I'm not I'm a bit of a dinosaur in regarding to computers and that. Although I was trained in their use, I wasn't really. I had one at my desk, and I could look at all my emails and answer those, etc. But I was a bit old-fashioned, a bit stubborn, I suppose. I didn't believe. I know I'm a bit negative. I didn't believe in typing my own letters and sending them.
Yeah.
I always had a couple of ladies that would assist me and type all my correspondence for me.
Very different era, eh?
Yes. I wouldn't exist today, I suppose. But it might have been, I was a bit stubborn, I suppose.
Now, towards the end of your career, of course, the Olympics happen in Penrith. Council has very strong involvement in the Olympics. What are your memories of that time in Penrith in 2000?
Well, by that time, I was occupying a different position.
Yep.
I looked after council's insurance, and then I was looking after council's occupation, health and safety. Mm-hmm. And when the Olympics came around in 2000, I was working in that section, and I volunteered I volunteered to assist in the Olympics in the field of occupational health and safety.
Yep.
And I was a volunteer down at Blacktown with the softball and baseball, etc. Down there. So I worked out of Blacktown. A lot of the other council staff worked at the rowing centre. Some, they worked all over. But there was about 20 of us, I think, worked as volunteers for the Olympics. But certainly the Olympics made a big change to Penrith. It put Penrith on the map in regard to the rowing, not so much the rowing, the regatta centre, and the white water stadium there at Penrith, where we've got our champions there now, the Fox sisters.
Yes.
And which is a great credit to the city. But that's certainly the Olympics made a great difference to it really opened up and showed people once again what Penrith had to offer. Yes.
Now, I want to talk about some of the other things you've done in Penrith, but before we do, we'll wrap up the career. The decision to leave council, 45 years, was it as simple as, time to retire, or what was the thought process around finally giving it up?
I could see that I hadn't come to grips with modern technology, and I thought it was a good time for me then to say I'd been there for 45 odd years.
Yeah, it's a long stint.
And I thought it was time. I gave it away and retired.
Remember your last day?
Yes, I do. My unbeknownst to me, the family came and decorated my desk. Yes. I had, the council certainly did look after me.
Yeah.
They gave me a dinner attended by my friends and the councillors, ex-councillors and the current councillors, businessmen of the town, etc. So they certainly looked after me. And the staff gave me numerous farewells because I went out to each of the childcare centres and went to all the other areas of council. So I've got at home oodles of photos and people and nice not resumes, but little brief notes written by all staff members who wanted to, that sent me a little message wishing me wishing me a happy and long retirement, which I was very grateful, and I still have.
And certainly, when you work somewhere 45 years, you not only accumulate a lot of friends and colleagues along the way, but you have an impact, obviously, on an organisation like that.
Especially when I got involved with employing so many.
Yeah.
You got to know them personally. And of course, not only that, Penrith City Council, you might realise, they had a in-house credit union at one time.
Yes, yep.
Right? And that was formed many years ago. And I was a foundation director of that. And when Don Hawkins retired as chairman of the credit union, I became chairman of the credit union, and I was chairman of the credit union when we found that we're only a small organisation. We did employ, I think it was a part-time office person to write the cheques and do that, all that, and keep our financial statements up to date. But we'll say that requirements by the government make it so much harder for little organisations to exist.
Yeah, sure.
So we amalgamated with the police credit union it was then, which is now the police bank.
Yep.
So that's what happened. And with the credit union, we were able to help a lot of staff members in providing them with some funds they wouldn't have been able to access easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it was a good service that the credit union provided.
Indeed. Now, you do a lot of other things in Penrith, and one of the key things, and I think it's how I first came across you, is your involvement in Penrith Paceway, Penrith Showground, harness racing in the city. How did that first come about? Where does your involvement come in there?
Well, I was a junior farmer. The family were junior farmers.
Yeah.
My father was the first president of the advisory committee of the Orchard Hills. It was Orchard Hills Kingswood Junior Farmers Club when it was formed in 1945.
Yep.
You joined. You weren't eligible to join the junior farmers until you were 10 years old. So it was from 10 to 21, and I became a junior farmer. And I followed in the footsteps of my older brother and sisters, and we all exhibited in Penrith Show.
Yep.
And in Penrith Show in 1972 and 78, I won a couple of cups, donated by A. Flint, Alderman Flint. He was a former councillor as well and president of the Show Society. And so I became involved in that side of things. And when trotting started in 1964, at the first registered trotting meeting, I was there. I wasn't a member then. Then I joined the Show Society, and then I took a back seat and became a committee member of the Show Society. And then over the years, in the middle of the Show Society, I left the Show Society for a few years, and I had 5 years with the Panthers.
Yep. Okay.
From 69 to 74.
Yep.
And because I had that break, I then had to serve so many years before I was eligible to stand as a Border Control member of the Paceway.
So what were you doing at the Panthers side of things?
I started off as just an ordinary committee member.
Yep.
Of the Panthers committee, It was a football committee.
Yep.
They just ran the football. Nothing to do with the licence club.
Yep.
We depended on
So
the
essentially the football board is, I mean, now it's a combined board.
Yes,
but
combined
back in the
board
day,
now. The football committee had to get their grant from the Panthers.
Yep.
Right? I was there for 5 years in the very uplifting and upheaval times of the Panthers.
Yeah, only a few years
I
after
was-
they'd entered the main competition.
I was there when they sacked Merv Cartwright.
Yeah.
I was there when they sacked Bob Boland. I was there when Penrith were beaten 70-7 by Manly.
Some very early dramas in the
Yeah.
history of what is now a very successful club. But
A
yeah,
very,
you
very
can't imagine Merv Cartwright these days getting sacked like there was
No.
a founding father of the
Well,
club.
in those days, they started off from scratch.
Mm.
Would you believe my first job when I got on the committee of the football committee was cutting the grass that was overhead on the banks of Penrith Park.
We'll have to tell the current board that they can get out there and cut
And
the
we
grass.
weren't entitled to get a blazer until you'd been on the board for so many years. But I started off as I was third grade secretary, assistant secretary. I was treasurer at one time. So I was greatly involved there under then Roger Cowan.
Yes.
I was under Roger and worked very successfully with Roger for those years. But football in those years was full on, right? We did the judiciary on Monday nights for the junior league. Went to training 2 nights a week. Board meetings other nights. Then you went to the games.
Mm. Long before the, I guess, professional era of rugby league.
long time before the professional era.
With everyone, with a professional lawnmower employed.
Yeah, that's
these
right.
days. And you head back to the Show Society after that, obviously.
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Right. But reason I left the football was I got married.
Yep.
Right. And I couldn't keep going to football 5 days a week and be married. Right. So, no, I went back and I stood for the board of the Paceway as a director.
Yep.
And I was a board of control then because it wasn't incorporated. I was unsuccessful. The first year I stood. The second year I got on, and I beat an old friend of mine called Bill Ward, who was Percy Hall's brother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
He'd been on the board for many years. I defeated him. He came back on later. And then I became... Neville Crouch stood down as treasurer, and I think in about 1982 I became treasurer, and I remained treasurer for the next nearly 30 years. So I had over 30 years on the board and nearly 30 years as treasurer.
And during that time, the golden era of harness racing in Penrith, I guess,
Well,
when the Paceway would be packed on a Thursday night there. And
Well, trotting was certainly a lot different those.
Yeah.
Because, the tab wasn't as great as it was.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to have a bet, you had to come to the track. And they were the same as racing right through. You didn't have it on TV, and you couldn't bet on. You didn't have those facilities. So if you wanted to have a bet, you had to go on course.
Yeah.
And at one time, Penrith had something like over 20 bookmakers there.
Yeah.
And we had 4 bookmakers on the away dog ring.
Yeah.
And we had some of the biggest bookmakers in New South Wales work there. Waterhouse and Bland and McHugh, they all worked at Penrith. So it was a very big concern. But today, you don't have any bookmakers on course. Even at Menangle, you only have a bookmaker there when it's a major night. You go to Hawkesbury today, to the races, and you've only got 3 or 4 on the rails at Hawkesbury, and they tell you there, it's just there to stand up. There's no money over there anymore. So not only harness racing, but all racing has taken a hit in the way of people not attending. But Penrith still get their loyal gathering of people that come every week. It's tonight there's 8 races there. I'll walk over to the trots tonight and stay for a few races and stay for the raffle, and then walk home again. So it's still Penrith track is a great spectacle. See, because you're so close to the racing. You've been to Menangle?
Yes, I have.
It's a long way away, looking over the back there, isn't it? You need to watch the screen to see the horse. But nothing wrong with Menangle. A wonderful track. The times they run there, it's outstanding. But it's not. You don't get close up in hand and close to the horses like you do at Penrith. Yes.
We know that there are some doubts over the future of the Paceway in Penrith, the showground, and therefore harness racing in Penrith. As someone who was involved with the club for so long and has been involved in Penrith for so long and has always known the showground on that site, what are your thoughts on where things are currently at?
Well, so it was marvellous. Someone saw me in the lift yesterday at the Royce and told me, "Oh, you're right. You're not going to move." And I said, "I don't know anything about it." I said, "I don't know what's happening, and I don't know. You might know, but I don't think anyone knows what's happening at the moment. Because of Stuart being stood down, etc., or he stood down, etc., and other things that are going on with the state government with their finances, etc." The showground, the show's been there. The first show was held in 1893. And it's been used not only for they always had trots there at shows and other times, but it's also been used for so many other things.
Yeah,
like cricket was played there in the old days. Penrith played their football there. They were still playing football there in 1952. I've got a report from the Nepean Times. I read this yesterday about Penrith playing football there, and still in 52 before they went over to Penrith Park, where it is today. They played Vigoro there. They used it for many things, and it'd be a shame to see the showground go. I don't know. It's a complex question of saying whether I agree they should go somewhere else or not. I don't want to get involved in that because
whatever happens, progress may get it in the end, but it doesn't mean that it's not a sad occasion if it does go.
It'd be a shame to see it go, but it's been a pivotal part of Penrith for so many years. And it's still an area of green space, regardless of who owns it. I wouldn't like to see any high rise put up on it. I think there's enough high rise around Penrith without putting high rise on the showground. Although to exist like Panthers have proved, you have to, you just can't live on income from a show and income from other things that you can run on the showground. You have to try and source other areas of gaining income.
What are you doing these days? What keeps Jim Mason busy in 2022?
Well, I'm still the honorary auditor of about 18 little organisations.
Okay.
I'm not
So different little charities and things like that around town?
No, well, they range from, I suppose the biggest organisation I audit is the Blue Mountains Netball Association.
Yep, okay. And big association there.
Yes, and I also audit 3 little netball clubs that are associated.
Yep.
I do the Chamber of Commerce at Glenbrook. I do the Probus Club at Blackstone Glenbrook. For 61 years I've been the auditor of the Penrith Cricket Association.
Wow, okay. I
got the role when there was an upheaval in the district when Darcy Smith was overthrown and Jock Clarence became president. There was a bit of a few walked out of the organisation. The auditor at the time didn't stand again, and I was nominated for the position, a position I still hold.
So pretty busy, and still this must keep you pretty occupied.
Well, I've got the historical societies at Penrith and St Mary's, the CWAs at Glenbrook and Penrith, and a lot of little organisations like the netball clubs and P&Cs and Weight Watchers, and I've even got Shane Park Bushfire Brigade. These are the things you've inherited over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it keeps it keeps my mind active.
Mm-hmm.
I can't charge anyone a fee. Most of them always want to give you a little gift or something or other for doing your services, which is appreciated. So that keeps me active. I'm also doing, and continually doing, I think I'll be doing it to the rest of the day of my life, I'm still doing the history of the showground.
Yep.
I've done a lot of it, and I'm still doing the history of Orchard Hills.
And still a lot to play out in those two things.
I'm trying to do a summary of all the old families of Orchard Hills.
Sure, okay, yep.
Right. Orchard Hills, although a small area, was predominantly in the early days settled by people belonged to the Methodist Church.
Mm-hmm.
And the Methodist Church was built there in 1904, and before that they operated their church out of someone's house, Calvert's place in Homestead Road.
Yep.
And then the school was built in 1910. So I'm still involved with the P&C at Orchard Hills, still got a little role at the church at Orchard Hills, and so Orchard Hills had a P&C and still a P&C. They had a Fruit Growers Association or Progress Association, which doesn't still exist. And then they had in the First World War, they had a Red Cross Society. They had a War Workers Club in the Second World War. They had a tennis club. They had a cricket club. And they had the Orchard Hills Hospital Auxiliary. So I've tried to summarise all those.
Indeed.
Only through, because as you'd realise, finding minute books of those organisations is very
difficult.
rare.
Yeah.
We've still got the minute books of the P&C and the fruit growers, but I haven't found any minute books of the other organisations, unfortunately. So I've only been able to get the information from the Nepean Times,
Mm-hmm.
which went out of existence in 1962.
It did indeed. Well, look, Jim, it's quite incredible and we need people that obviously want to preserve history and also want to detail that history for future generations. So I'm glad that you're doing it. Last question that we always ask: how would you like to be remembered in Penrith?
Oh, I suppose I'd like to be remembered as someone who was interested in their local community and took the trouble to become involved in the local community and try and preserve the history of the local community. That's how I'd like to be remembered.
Well, I think you will be, because I think you've certainly done that. Jim, thanks very much for coming up today and having a chat with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And I really hope you enjoyed our chat. On the Record is produced by The Western Weekender. To hear future episodes or past episodes, search Western Weekender wherever you listen to podcasts and make sure you hit subscribe. Check out westernweekender.com.au and we will see you next time.